Welcome back to A Hill with a View. It is Thursday, which means we're going to do a Thursday throwback episode. Today we're going to be discussing a episode back from 2016, a great interview, and we're going to get to that in a second. But first, please make sure to like this video, share this video with a friend, and most importantly, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We could really appreciate it. It would help us grow. Make sure to get all that information out there. Like, share, and subscribe. All right. So this video, this Throwback Thursday, we're going to do a video back from October 26, 2016, when Jordan Peterson, I think you've all heard of him, a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, he went on a show called The Agenda. I'm sure you've seen clips from this. We're actually going to go through a lot of it. It was an hour-long episode where he had 4 different people who disagreed with him, and he basically took them all to task about the transgender agenda. So what caused this video, this interview to happen was that when Jordan Peterson, posted a YouTube video which criticized the Bill C-16 in Canada, which adds gender identity and gender expression to the list of prohibited grounds of discrimination. It caused, they say his video caused concern and sparked conversation, and it had 1.5 million hits at the time. I'm sure it's much higher now because this interview has almost 10 million views on YouTube. So we're going to go through it. I picked out a certain amount of clips from the interview. I highly recommend everyone watch the entire interview if you haven't already. I'm going to post a link to the interview in the comments and the video description below. So make sure you watch that whole thing if you have the time. But if you don't, we're going to go through some of those clips right now. So we're just going to start with the premise of the show. We're going to start right from the beginning.
What's in a name? Potentially a great deal. University of Toronto psychology professor Jordan Peterson has a fight on his hands after objecting to proposed legislation that he says would violate his freedom of speech by forcing him to address transgendered people using the pronouns of their choosing.
So that's basically what led to it, okay? And this is how they introduced it. They said, and they wanted to show some of the controversy that Peterson was going through at the time, so they also led with this. So this was happening in the University of Toronto.
Opponents of free speech are capable of making a lot of inarticulate noise. Free speech is the mechanism by which we keep our society functioning.
And by doing this, you're imposing. Whoa! Not cool.
I'm going to post this online that you would like people to be more accommodating of trans people and people of color at your events in future.
I'm a person of color.
I'm a person of color, and I felt very accommodating here. There have been multiple recorded instances of trans people killing themselves because they are not being integrated into society.
If it wasn't for this law, and I asked you to refer to me with they, them pronouns, would you?
Why do you have the authority to determine whether or not an individual is worthy of you using their pronouns? Like, if I asked you, would you please use they, them pronouns for me? What?
It would depend on what
hoops do you want us to jump through?
Those are my pronouns.
So, Peterson, as you can see from that, he had a huge crowd around him. This is from a big event, and he had people who are obviously anti-him, but he had a lot of people who agreed with him and who were supportive of him, or at least his right to speak, even if they disagreed with him. And that's really what this entire debate came down to. So there's a few issues at play here. There's 2 basic debates happening at the same time, which we're going to go through and take a look at. But basically the 2 debates are, does he have the right to say what he wants to say and have not just the ability to say what he wants, but not be forced to say what other people want. That's one debate that's happening at this time. And then the second debate that's happening this time is essentially, what is the reality of biology, really? It's kind of weird. And that's also happening at the same time. Let's just take a quick look at Jordan Peterson's initial reasoning.
Well, fundamentally,
there were two things that really bothered me, although there have been other things I've thought about since. One was that I was being asked, as everyone is, to use a certain set of words that I think are the constructions of people who have a political ideology that I don't believe in and that I also regard as dangerous.
What are those words?
Those are the made-up words that people now describe as gender neutral. They're an attempt to control language and in a direction that isn't happening organically. It's not happening naturally. People aren't picking up these words in the typical way that new words are picked up, but by force and by fiat. And I would say by force because there's legislative power behind them.
So that's really what his reasoning is that it's not so much of an issue as using pronouns. It's an issue of government forcing you to use pronouns. That's what Jordan Peterson's issue has always been with this situation, is that force being used on you for certain language should not be in the purview of what government is able to do. Now, a few of the other people, I didn't really get into deep into the backgrounds of everyone who was on the panel with him, but there was a transgender activist who basically, her name was Theron, and basically there was the issue of that Theron was saying that you shouldn't be forced to compel other people to have transgender pronouns. There was someone else named Nicholas Matt, who actually we're going to get a lot of clips of because I think he was the craziest. And he basically had the opposite extreme. Not only should you force people to do it, but there should be a lot of rules against you. There was somebody who was basically another transgender person who wrote a column who was talking about this. And then there was a law professor who was talking about the legality of it. So here's Jordan Peterson again.
You know, of course, that since this story broke, you've been called a lot of things.
Yeah.
One of which is a transphobe.
Well, I can tell you that I've received more letters from transsexual people supporting me than opposing me. And I never said anything really about transsexual people, about their existence, although that was the first thing that I was accused of doing. I didn't say that transsexual people didn't exist. I said that gender identity, gender expression, and biological sex do not vary independently, which they don't. And so this issue is in some sense only peripherally about transsexual issues. It's more centrally about gender issues. And then on top of that, and I think it's the biggest issue, is that it's a free speech issue.
So Peterson is actually keeping this as a free speech issue. And with basically the undercurrent of it being about transgender issue or the idea that you can change your sex, you can change your gender, you can be non-binary, you could be some kind of third, fourth, fifth, sixth. I mean, they mentioned in the interview that at the time in 2016, New York City was recognizing, I think, 31 different genders. I'm sure they recognize a lot more now. I think San Francisco has, had officials show at least over 90 different genders. So Peterson is actually talking about the free speech issue and not necessarily the biological issue, but one of the panelists actually talks about the biological issue. Take a listen to this.
And Nicholas, this is where I want to bring you into the discussion because you teach this. You teach trans studies. So if you would, give us a brief primer on so many gender identities that in your view require non-traditional pronouns.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex. And I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't.
It's not correct that there is such a thing as a biological sex is the classic example of a statement that's so dumb, only an academic could come up with it.
So that's a very popular misconception. So the history is
give us some of the other pronouns that one would hear, typically.
I don't focus on pronouns because pronouns are actually part of a cisnormative culture. So what we do is learn about...
Well, I'm going to stop you right there.
Yes, I was just about to explain.
Good.
So we don't start from a cisnormative perspective because that can't actually go very far.
What does cisnormative mean?
So I'm going to start us there. Cisnormative is basically the very popular idea and assumption that most people probably have, and definitely that our structures convey, that there is such a thing as male and female, that they connect to being a girl or a boy or a man or a woman.
That one always gets me. I've watched that like a bunch of times, that particular clip. It always gets me that it's just this popular belief that there's such a thing as male and female. As if like this has no basis in fact. And the idea that this person is so confident in that, it actually is just mind-boggling to me. So the next clip is actually kind of a rebuke to people who just call Jordan Peterson, you know, a hate monger or a jerk or whatever you want to call him.
I'm sure, I mean, I would hope that if I were a student of Dr. Peterson, that
this Theron transgender woman,
as she, and wouldn't have a problem with that. But at the end of the day, you know, a personal pronoun preference still is a preference for what language other people use. And at the end of the day, I don't have ultimate control over what Dr. Peterson, what the language he chooses to use, or anybody else for that matters. That's up to them.
Okay, let me find out then.
Arises,
let me find out. If she were a student of yours, what would you call her?
She.
I mean, that's it. It's just that simple. Jordan Peterson isn't afraid to use someone's preferred pronouns. Jordan Peterson does not want to be compelled by the government. That's it. And that's really the entire debate. He does not want to be compelled by the government. Now, what they're trying to make the debate about is not about government compulsion of free speech, but rather about biological sex, reality, use of speech causes harm, or it's abusive, stuff like that. And we're going to see that in the next couple clips. So, but this is Jordan Peterson explaining like the difference between the two debates.
Well, I don't understand what the claim that there's no such thing as biological sex means. And I certainly think it's, let's call it an error, to suggest that there's some sort of scientific consensus about that.
He's being very nice.
There's biological differences between males and females in animals and human beings at every level of analysis.
Okay, I'm jumping in here, because what about the notion he put forward at the end there, that if you do not refer to people with the pronoun that they prefer to be referred to, that is a form, according to the Human Rights Commission, of discrimination.
It's not just a form of discrimination, it's a form of hate speech. That's why I made the video. I said that we were in danger of placing the refusal to use certain kinds of language into the same category as Holocaust denial, and suggested that maybe that wasn't such a good idea, especially since there's plenty of debate to be had about gender issues in our society, which I also think are also in danger of becoming illegal, and quite rapidly. So it isn't clear to me how long we'll be able to have the talk that we're having right now.
So Peterson's basically making the claim that we still have to be able to discuss these things. And government fiat, forcing the control of what is allowed to be talked about and not allowed to be talked about, is an appetite for, is a recipe for destruction of the entire society. And so they brought in the law professor to say, oh, this isn't a big deal. There's no jail time. And this is basically saying, this is what could happen to you.
Graphic up. Pronoun misuse may become actionable through the human rights tribunals and the courts. And the remedies? Monetary damages, non-financial remedies, for example, ceasing the discriminatory practice or reinstatement to the job, and public interest remedies, for example, changing hiring practices or developing non-discriminatory policies and procedures. Jail time is not one of them. Jordan, you're not going to go to jail if you keep this up. Do you find that reassuring?
What if I don't pay the fine? The lawyer who's discussing this is downplaying the significance of it tremendously.
Could I speak?
So he's got a point. I mean, first of all, the idea that just getting a fine in New York, it's a $250,000 fine. That is life ruining for a lot of people. If a business deliberately doesn't use the preferred pronouns of somebody, they could be fined $250,000, up to $250,000. That can ruin someone's life. I know that would ruin my life if I got fined for $250,000. So just because there's no physical jail time doesn't mean that there's not massive, massive penalties to this, to not complying with forced speech. And then Peterson makes a good point. What if I refuse to pay it? What happens then? Do they garnish your wages? What do? Do they, I know there's no such thing as debtor's prison, but what happens? What is the remedy for this? What's next? What's next? That's what he wants to know. Is someone going to come to your house with a gun and agents from the IRS and start taking your stuff? Are they going to call the bank and repossess your house over this? Like, in Canada, they shut down bank accounts for supporting truckers who were against mandates. That's what they did in Canada. Like, what is happening? This isn't like a crazy slippery slope kind of thing. These are actual questions that need to be asked. What will happen to you if you refuse to go along with this? So then there gets to the next point, which that it's not about freedom of speech. Take a look.
I don't agree with why Dr. Peterson has been asked to stop abusing students on campus.
To stop doing what?
Abusing students.
I see.
And other members of our learning community who do deserve respect and do deserve to be able.
Peterson, the level of restraint this guy has, I would go nuts. I mean, if someone called me abusive because I refuse to comply with pronouns, abusive. It's abusing students.
To work and learn and contribute to society in a place where if they are physically assaulted, if they are...
The assault so far came from the social justice warriors who are at this free speech rally, and almost 2 million people have watched those so far.
This is not accurate.
Well, you can look at the videos yourself.
Because people have been making complaints about your behavior.
Yes, I understand that.
Yes.
Yep.
And so we're seeing a greater opportunity for social justice happening that many people won't understand.
Nick, can I be clear on something? You've accused him of abusing students by not using the pronouns they want to be addressed by.
That's how I see it, absolutely.
That is tantamount to abuse in your view.
Absolutely. Many global documents, many organizations.
How about violence? Is it tantamount to violence?
Yes,
How about hate speech? Is it tantamount to hate speech?
Yes, of course. It's hate speech to tell someone that you won't refer to them as in a way that they that recognizes their humanity.
So it's hate speech, it's violence, it's abusive to not call somebody by their preferred pronouns, even though it's biologically false. You were born male. You want to be called she. If I refuse to do that, it is violent, it is hate speech, it is abusive. It should be punished. It should be fined. That is what Nicholas Matt is saying. And that's what a lot of people believe. Now, who is it that believes that? Jordan Peterson gets into that too.
And it seems to me, and you can correct me.
This is the transgender man. I think, I don't know. I know she was born a woman, but basically she wrote a column about this, and so she was brought out.
If I'm wrong. But one of his anxieties, and he talks about being fearful and anxious in his video, that somehow there's a cabal of trans activists who have so much power that they are going to basically, using the pronouns that people want and capitulating to these demands, sort of pulls out the Jenga, the critical Jenga piece of the Western canon, right? I mean, basically, Jordan is arguing that this is going to create chaos and anarchy, and that it's essentially a Marxist plot that is there to sow violence and there to sow confusion and topple any kind of hierarchy.
It's not a transsexual cabal by any stretch of the imagination. Is it a cabal of radical left-wingers? Yes, it's a cabal of radical left-wingers, and they've been active behind and in front of the scenes increasingly over the last 30 years. And my estimation is that departments like Women's Studies have trained between 300,000 and 3 million radical left-wing activists, and they're...
So, Jordan Peterson basically makes the case that they're basically saying, like, this woman was basically saying, like, oh, they're talking about that that's this big conspiracy theory, and there's this cabal of people who are doing this, and they're going to collapse civilization. And Peterson's making the simple case of this is being taught in the university level, is being taught to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who believe this and who will go to the mat to see this through. Now, what's not mentioned in this video, this is back in 2016. What's not mentioned in this video is that where these gender studies, women's studies, yada yada people are going, because they're not all becoming women's studies professors, and they have to get jobs somewhere, and they're not all becoming Starbucks baristas. And where I think they're going actually is human resources departments in businesses, in major corporations. And that's why major corporations over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years have been shifting radically to the left. That's why every single major corporation requires, multiple trainings per year regarding all these various different trans ideologies or whatever it is. And this is something that basically Peterson was trying to call out on and saying, like, these people are being trained in a certain ideological way, and they're forcing that worldview onto everyone else. And there's no denying that this is happening, obviously. So here's Jordan Peterson talking about the fact that this is compelled speech.
Words are tools. Maybe that was one of the great philosophical discoveries of the 20th century. And that means, and people are always looking for new tools to operate in the world. And if you invent a good tool, like a new word, then people will pick it up just as fast as they possibly can. You really see that in English. But the words that are being required now are not good tools, and that's why people aren't using them. And so instead what we have is the use of force, despite the fact that that's being denied. Although we've already established that, at least in the opinion of one of the people on this panel, I'm already guilty of a hate crime, which is what I said I was guilty of when I made that video. Steve, the issue with the law is quite straightforward. The government is requiring us to use certain language. That's not the same as not using certain language. And it's a line, and this is the fundamental issue. This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. And it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the most extreme caution, because you interfere with people's ability to think and communicate.
That is the crux of the argument. That is the main point of what Peterson is trying to say, is that words are tools. Words are used now for good and for bad. Words can be used for bad reasons. Words can be used for good reasons. But once you start putting constraints on language, then that's the collapse of civilization that basically people are scoffing at. So now here's the case to compel that speech.
Why, in your view, do you think the trans community needs this kind of legislative protection?
Well, thank you. That's basically the point that hasn't been raised yet, which is that people are actually suffering huge lack of access to resources that will allow people to survive. So people are being physically assaulted. People do not have counselors that they can go to who are not going to, as Dr. Peterson has done on YouTube, recommend that they actually become more anxious and more upset about situations. 58% of students could not get academic transcripts with their correct name or pronoun. The feeling of disrespect is not as important as the ways that people in authority are able to circumvent the possibilities for living. So it has more to do with not being able to find housing and therefore being homeless, has more to do with not being able to get jobs because people are discriminated against. So we're not actually we shouldn't be talking about free speech. What we should be talking about are the social issues facing people who are being discriminated against and what that looks like on campus, which is that some professors refuse to offer basic dignity to students and colleagues.
So the case to compel the speech is that if you don't use a student's preferred pronouns, then this will start a cycle or a snowball's effect, a domino effect of this person being homeless, not being able to get a job, not being able to contribute to be in society, basically destroying the life, his or her life, if you don't use the preferred pronouns of this person. Now, that's not a very compelling case to me, because if you are such a fragile person that you can literally have your life completely ruined because a teacher refuses to be forced to use your pronouns, then you have so many other issues that can't be even quantified in a single moment. Like you've boiled it all down to that one little thing, but it really can't be that one little thing. He's saying you've become homeless. He's saying that you are possibly suicidal. He's saying that you cannot contribute to society or be in society. That's what he's saying, and that's why we need to force people to do it. Now, at least he is engaging in the debate. There was someone else who was supposed to be on the panel who refused to be on the panel, and this is why.
I would say the number is 100% of people will benefit from more open discussion. And
here is somebody who did not share your view on that, because we invited another guest to be on the program today, and this person initially said yes, and then sent a Facebook message to our producer, Vodic Schemberg, saying, you know what, changed my mind. Giving Jordan Peterson this platform serves to legitimize his views, which are based in bigotry and misinformation. The humanity and rights of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people are not a matter of debate, and holding a debate which places a false equivalency between the views expressed by Peterson and the human rights concerns of the trans community would be an act of transphobia. Therefore, none of us wish to participate in this. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. That's a very important perspective.
That's why I read it.
So, basically, even having a debate over whether or not the government should be allowed to compel speech from people is transphobia. You see how this all cycles together. Okay. So, just a couple more clips. Just going to roll through these quickly because otherwise this entire video is going to be as long as the actual panel itself.
But I don't think we're talking past each other at all in a fundamental sense. I mean, I think that the real problem here is that there's a concerted attempt being made by many people to subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome, because many people are claiming that the expression of these sorts of views should no longer be permitted. And it's this view for now, but this is a minor issue in some ways compared to the larger issue that's at stake, which is our right to have discussions of this sort at all. Like, I mean, one thing that happened right when we started this was that there was an initial claim, for example, that there's no such thing as biological sex. Well, I believe quite firmly that if we continue on our present path at the universities for 5 more years, that's a discussion we will not actually be able to have on campuses.
He's right. I mean, listen, it is 6 years later. That discussion is happening on campuses, whether or not biological sex exists completely. And I think the only reason why it hasn't been banned from campuses is because of people like Jordan Peterson. So, here, take a look at this one.
But it was an axiom, say, of feminism, for example, that the personal was political. And isn't that that's a famous phrase, the personal is political.
Okay, the personal is political when someone is attacking you on a basis that is personal and that you can't change about yourself. And that's why people start to fight back, and that's why people object.
And your attempts to regulate my language use and
I don't care about your language use. I care about the safety of the people who are being harmed.
I know. People who make your kinds of arguments are always concerned with other people's safety.
He's absolutely right. He's like, oh, I'm not regulating your language. I'm preventing those people from being killed. Well, how are you preventing those people from being killed? By regulating your language. You see how that works? So they're just trying to redirect the argument, except for they're not redirecting anything because we see through it.
free speech is a great idea and equality is a great idea, but we actually can't have those conversations when people are not even able to be present.
Can someone please explain to Jordan B. Peterson that there's a difference between freedom of speech and freedom from consequence? Do you agree there's a difference?
Well, certainly there's a difference.
And are you prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that. Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues.
I mean, it just comes down to that. It's like, are you prepared? That's the question for a lot of people is, are you prepared to face the consequences of not complying with the radical leftists who are coming up with these rules and the government actors who are willing to back them? Are you prepared to do that? Very few people are prepared to do that. I'm not sure I am. I think if pressure came down to bear on me for making certain videos and saying certain things, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I have a lot to lose. Everyone does. So it's a tough situation. I mean, look at certain people in the public square who don't comply with these things. The pressure on them is enormous. I mean, kudos to Jordan Peterson, for before he was world famous and before he was the household name that he is today, still being able to do that. So here's the last clip. This is just Jordan Peterson finishing up.
And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization.
And I think that's the funny, interesting thing about this whole thing is that it's the surface nature, that this whole thing is basically scratching the surface of, because the people who think that you should be allowed to compel the speech by force of government, I think they're underestimating how detrimental this is to actual society. To have the government take away your right to say what you want to say. And not only do that, but force you to say what they want you to say. And I think that's what Peterson's getting to. So this is the first of the Throwback Thursday episodes. Any suggestions, please leave it in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more of these videos. We want to get these coming to you. This is A Hill with a View. Make sure to subscribe. Have a good one.